What happens when a quiet flight at 30,000 feet becomes the stage for a storm of dignity, power, and truth. Imagine sitting in first class, ready to relax, when a flight attendant accidentally spills juice across your clothes, and instead of an apology, you're met with gaslighting, mockery, and silence. This is not just about spilled juice, it's about a black woman, Dr. Celine Ward, a world-class neurosurgeon forced to defend her dignity against a crew determined to strip it away. It's about the moment her calm composure became her shield, and her billionaire husband, Calum Ward, turned corporate power into a weapon for justice. But here's the question. How far can discrimination go when witnessed by an entire cabin of passengers? And what happens when silence breaks? When ordinary travelers find the courage to stand up beside one woman who refused to bow tonight? You'll see how one flight spiraled into a global reckoning, a fight for dignity, a call for change, a story that refuses to be silenced. If you believe dignity matters, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to hear is more than a story. It's a movement. The morning air at Denver International carried that familiar mix of roasted coffee, polished metal, and faint jet fuel. Travelers dragged rolling suitcases over the tiled concourse, voices echoing in the high glass ceiling like fragments of stories overlapping. Dr. Celine Ward paused for a moment near gate C-17, adjusting the strap of her leather carry-on against her shoulder. She had just finished a grueling week of night shifts at the hospital, hours of surgery stacked upon more hours of charting. This flight wasn't just a chance to rest. It was supposed to be a threshold, a transition into something different. She was headed to San Francisco, where she would give a keynote address at the International Neuroscience Forum. Her name was listed beside world-renowned researchers, and the thought of it filled her with a quiet pride. But she didn't wear pride on her face. Instead, she wore the calm armor of someone used to enduring scrutiny, a navy blazer, pressed slacks, minimal makeup, and hair pulled back neatly. She looked, in every sense, like the professional she was. Still, as she stepped toward the first-class boarding line, she caught the glance of the gate agent, a quick flicker that slid from her boarding pass to her skin color. The woman's smile faltered before she forced it back. Celine inhaled slowly, letting the air steady her. It wasn't the first time. It never was. The boarding call rang out, and passengers began funneling toward the jet bridge. The scent of metal intensified, mixed now with the faint dampness of air conditioning. Celine followed the line, tapping her boarding pass against the scanner. A soft beep confirmed her seat. 2A. Window. First class. She had chosen it not for status, but for the precious quiet it promised. As she entered the cabin, she took in the cream-colored leather seats, the polished wood armrests, the delicate click of overhead bins closing. A flight attendant with a tight bun and pressed uniform, Marissa Cade, stood at the doorway. Her smile was professional, but her eyes swept over Celine with an edge sharp enough to cut. "Seat," Marissa asked, though the boarding pass clearly displayed it. 2E, Celine replied, her voice even, a flicker, just enough to notice Marissa's lips tightened before she gestured. "This way." Celine walked down the aisle, past passengers already settling in. A man in a tailored gray suit sipped sparkling water. A woman scrolled through her tablet with painted nails tapping rhythmically. Their eyes darted briefly to Celine before returning to their devices. She placed her bag overhead and lowered into her seat. The leather was cool beneath her palms. She exhaled, releasing the hospital week behind her, focusing on the days ahead. Yet her mind, trained in observing the smallest detail of a brain scan, couldn't ignore the micro-expressions, the narrowed glances. They whispered a question she had answered too many times. "Do you belong here?" She opened her notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes for her keynote, diagrams of neural pathways, bullet points about resilience and regeneration. She found comfort in the order of the lines, the clarity of facts. But even as she reviewed them, her thoughts strayed. Should she have dressed differently? Would a silk scarf, a brighter lipstick, have softened the assumptions, or would nothing ever be enough to rewrite the script some people carried in their minds? She shook the thought away, reminding herself that her presence alone was the answer. She belonged because she had earned it 100 times over. A shadow passed across her tray table. Selene looked up to find another attendant. A man with slicked-back hair and a badge that read Dorian Voss. He leaned slightly too close, eyes flicking at her notebook. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" he asked. His tone polite but weighted with disinterest. "Just water, please." He nodded curtly, moving on to the next passenger. The contrast in tone was immediate, his voice lifting warmly as he greeted the man in the suit. Selene watched, lips pressing into a thin line. She felt the familiar knot at the base of her throat, the tug of being measured against invisible scales. Outside, the whine of engines grew louder as baggage carts rolled away. The aircraft vibrated faintly with life. Selene closed her eyes briefly, centering herself in the hum. She reminded herself of her purpose. She wasn't just a traveler. She was carrying ideas that mattered, words that could shift perspectives, maybe even lives. The captain's voice came over the intercom, warm but clipped. Captain Alden Graves welcoming passengers to the flight, noting clear skies on the way to San Francisco. Selene allowed the voice to wash over her like a cue in a theater, the curtain rising. Yet inside, the quiet war continued. A question surfaced: should she always have to prove her worth? Why must every boarding line, every service counter, become another silent test? She thought of her husband, Calum, who often urged her to ignore the looks, to focus on the victories ahead. But Calum had never walked in her shoes through a first-class cabin, had never felt the subtle freeze of air when someone doubted your right to sit where you sat. Her fingers brushed over the edge of her phone. A part of her considered sending him a quick text, just aboarded safely. Another part resisted. She wanted this flight to be hers, not shadowed by worry. The clink of glasses drew her attention. Dorian returned, setting a glass of water before her with mechanical precision. He didn't meet her eyes. The condensation slid down the glass, a bead dropping onto her notebook. Selene dabbed it gently with a napkin, her lips forming a small, wry smile. Even droplets couldn't smear what she had prepared. Passengers continued boarding, the cabin filling with the rustle of jackets and the low murmur of voices. Selene straightened in her seat, gazing out the window at the wing stretching into the pale morning light. Somewhere beneath the hum, a thought crystallized. This would not be just another flight. The intuition sat heavy, like the pause before a scalpel cut sharp, irreversible. The boarding door closed with a muffled thud, and the hum of the engines deepened, filling the cabin with a low vibration. Passengers settled into their seats, fastening belts, stowing devices. Selene Ward leaned back, letting the cool leather cradle her shoulders. She tried to lose herself in the pages of her notebook again, but a voice pulled her attention upward. "Excuse me, ma'am," said Marissa Cade, her tone clipped, professional only by the narrowest margin. "I'll need you to make sure your bag is pushed all the way in. We wouldn't want it falling on anyone." Celine glanced at the overhead bin above her seat. Her carry-on was neatly tucked, handle facing out, aligned with the others. She had slid it into place herself, double-checking the latch. "It's secure," Celine replied calmly. Marissa's eyes flicked up, scanning the bag with deliberate skepticism before landing back on Celine. "We'll check again before takeoff." She offered a brittle smile and walked away. A small exchange, nothing dramatic. To the untrained eye, it was routine, but Celine recognized the undertone. She had flown enough miles to know the difference between genuine diligence and a pointed reminder of her supposed place. She exhaled slowly, steadying the heat in her chest. Her mind, always sharp with surgical focus, replayed the moment. Should she have said more? Should she have let it pass? She turned back to her notes, but her concentration wavered. On the page, the word resilience stared back at her, underlined twice. Resilience in neurons, resilience in human beings. She wondered how many times she herself had lived the word. Moments later, Dorian Voss appeared with a tray of pre-departure drinks. His slicked hair caught the light as he leaned toward the man in the gray suit, offering champagne with a warm grin. Then he moved to Celine. "Water again?" he asked, voice stripped of the warmth he had just given the man beside her. "Yes, water is fine," Celine said, her tone even. He set the glass down with a faint clink, his hand brushing the edge of her notebook. A droplet of condensation slid across the page, curling the corner of her notes. Celine dabbed it with a napkin, jaw tightening. The man in the gray suit glanced over briefly, his brow furrowed as if confused. But he said nothing. He returned to his champagne, the fizz catching the overhead light. Celine forced herself to sip her water, cool liquid against the dryness in her throat. She thought of her husband, Callum. He would tell her to ignore it, to keep her eyes on the larger picture. "Don't let them shrink you," he had said countless times, and yet, here in the cabin's close quarters, shrinking felt like the safest option. Marissa returned with a stack of menus, distributing them row by row. When she reached Celine, she paused just long enough to make the hesitation noticeable. She held out the menu, her expression hovering between politeness and disdain. "Here you go," Marissa said, her voice flat. Celine took the menu, her fingers brushing the thick cardstock. She opened it, scanning the options: grilled salmon, filet mignon, a vegetarian pasta. The words blurred slightly as her mind spiraled inward. Should she speak up? Should she confront the tone, the glances, the subtle refusals of grace? Or should she remain silent, conserving her energy for the keynote that awaited her? Her pulse quickened as she imagined the possible outcomes. If she spoke, would she be labeled disruptive? Would she be accused of overreacting? The narrative was too familiar. The calm professional reframed as the angry black woman. The scales were already weighted, and she knew it. Celine closed the menu and placed it carefully on her tray. She adjusted her blazer, as though the fabric itself could become another layer of armor. The engines roared, the plane nudging back from the gate. Outside the window, ground crew waved, their neon vests bright against the tarmac. Inside, the cabin lights dimmed and the seatbelt sign chimed. Celine rested her head briefly against the headrest. eyes half closed. The hum of the engines pressed against her ears like white noise. She told herself to breathe, to endure. But endurance was never passive. Endurance was a choice, a constant negotiation between silence and assertion. She thought of her patience, of the moments when scalpels hovered millimeters from fragile tissue. One wrong move, one rushed decision, could change everything. Perhaps this flight was no different. Each response mattered. Dorian's voice broke her thoughts. "We'll be collecting meal preferences shortly," he said to the row, his gaze skipping over her before returning reluctantly. Celine raised her eyes. "I'll have the salmon, please." He scribbled something on his notepad, his mouth pressed into a thin line. The man in the suit beside her cleared his throat. He looked at Celine for a moment, as though weighing whether to say something. Then he looked away, retreating into the safe silence passengers often chose. Celine turned to the window. The city below shrank, highways winding like veins, neighborhoods patchworked in brown and green, clouds loomed ahead, pale against the rising sun. She felt the plane lift, her stomach dipping slightly, the transition from earth to air. In that moment, she whispered to herself, unheard by anyone else, "Hold steady." Her phone, tucked in the seat pocket, vibrated with a calendar alert reminder of her keynote slides, final draft. She tapped the screen, silencing it. The words on the screen blurred briefly as she blinked back an ache. She didn't want to carry this heaviness into San Francisco, but the cabin seemed determined to force it on her. Marissa reappeared to check seat belts. She leaned over Celine unnecessarily, brushing her shoulder as she adjusted the belt latch. "Just making sure it's tight," she said, voice almost sweet, but not quite. Celine stiffened but forced her features into neutrality. She had long mastered the art of not giving satisfaction to those who tested her. As the plane leveled, meal service began, trays clinked, silverware chimed. Celine's salmon arrived lukewarm, while the man beside her received his filet mignon steaming. She noted the difference silently, pressing her lips together. A memory surfaced her mother on a long-ago flight, whispering to a younger Celine to always carry herself with grace, because some people would look for any excuse to strip it away. Her mother's voice echoed now, grounding her. Celine ate slowly, each bite deliberate. She felt the stares occasionally, the glance from Marissa at the galley, the quick look from Dorian as he passed. They weren't overt, not enough to spark intervention, but they were sharp enough to pierce. Inside, a storm brewed. One part of her wanted to rise, to name the pattern, to force acknowledgement. Another part whispered caution, reminding her of the stage she would soon step onto, the lives that might be touched by her words. Was silence complicit, or was silence strategy? She set her fork down, fingers curling against the cool metal. She closed her eyes briefly, summoning the discipline that had carried her through endless nights in the operating room. Not every battle had to be fought aloud. Some could be recorded, documented, revealed in the right forum. She slipped her phone into her palm, the screen lighting beneath her thumb. Her camera roll opened, then her voice recorder. She tapped it once, the red circle glowing faintly. The phone slid back into her lap, hidden beneath the napkin. If they wanted to test her dignity, she would make sure the test was on record. The hum of the cabin continued, oblivious. The man beside her shifted, tugging at his tie. Marissa's laughter drifted faintly from the galley as she spoke to another passenger. Celine sat still, composed, her phone recording quietly in the background. The microaggressions had begun, but Celine knew storms often started with whispers before they broke into thunder. She straightened in her seat, eyes fixed on the horizon. Whatever was coming, she would meet it head on. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow as the plane cruised above the clouds. The air was thick with the scent of reheated meals, the faint sweetness of bread rolls, and the sterile chill of conditioned air. Celine Ward had just finished pushing her tray away, resting her palms flat on her lap. The quiet should have felt like relief, but tension lingered in her shoulders like an invisible weight. She focused on the clouds outside the window, their tops lit gold by the rising sun. Her body craved rest, but her mind refused to let go. Every clipped word from Marissa Cade, every subtle gesture from Dorian Voss replayed like a film loop. She pressed her lips together, reminding herself she would not allow strangers to dictate her peace. The aisle rustled as Marissa emerged from the galley with a tray of drinks. Her heels tapped rhythmically against the carpet, her posture straight, her smile practiced. She moved with ease between the rows, pouring wine for one passenger, setting down sparkling water for another. When she reached Celine's row, her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Would you like another beverage?" Marissa asked, the sweetness of her tone just sharp enough to feel like mockery. "Orange juice, please," Celine said, deciding on something simple, something harmless. Marissa poured into a glass, her movements deliberate, almost theatrical. She leaned over, and in a moment that would feel rehearsed later, her wrist tilted. The glass tipped too far. A wave of sticky orange liquid cascaded over Celine's lap, splattering across her blazer, soaking the front of her slacks, and bleeding into the notebook she had kept close at hand. Gasps rose from a few nearby passengers, followed quickly by the hush of avoidance. Heads turned briefly, then swiveled back toward tablets, books, champagne glasses. Celine froze for half a second. The cold citrus seeped through the fabric, clinging to her skin. She looked down at her notebook, its pages warped, the ink bleeding into illegibility. "Oh my," Marissa said, but the words rang hollow. She reached for a napkin with exaggerated slowness, dabbing at the spill as if it were Celine's fault. Then, under her breath, just loud enough for Celine to hear, "Maybe these seats aren't for everyone." The phrase sliced through the cabin air sharper than the smell of citrus. Celine's chest tightened, but she did not look up. Instead, she drew in a breath, steady and deliberate. She took the napkin from Marissa's hand herself, blotting her clothes with precise movements, her jaw set around her. Silence deepened. The man in the gray suit beside her shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between the women, then down to his glass of champagne. No words left his mouth. Celine placed the soaked napkin on her tray and picked up her phone. Her thumb brushed the screen, activating the recorder again. The faint red light glowed against her lap, hidden beneath the ruined notebook. "Accidents happen," Celine said quietly, her voice so calm it carried a strength sharper than anger. Marissa's smile twitched, her eyes narrowing before she turned away. She left the aisle without another apology. The orange juice cooled quickly against Celine's skin, sticky and uncomfortable. She sat perfectly still, her spine straight, refusing to give the satisfaction of a visible reaction. Inside, her thoughts collided in rapid succession. She should speak up. She should demand an incident report. But another voice whispered, warning her of the labels waiting to be slapped onto her: disruptive, difficult, uncooperative. Her breathing steadied as she repeated the word resilience in her mind. Resilience of neurons, resilience of self. She would not let Marissa define the story. Minutes passed, though they stretched like hours. Dorian passed by, his eyes flicking at the stain before darting away. His smirk was fleeting, but Celine caught it. He continued down the aisle without offering help. Celine's hand hovered over her phone. She considered sending a message to Calum. He would want to know. He would want to storm the skies to protect her. But she hesitated. This was her moment, her dignity, her test. She tightened her grip around the phone, leaving the message unsent. The call button above her seat beckoned. She pressed it once. The soft chime rang, the small light glowing. No one came. She pressed it again. The sound echoed faintly through the cabin. Still, no one appeared. A third press. The light blinked insistently. From the galley, she caught a glimpse of Marissa turning her head, then deliberately flipping a switch. The chime silenced. The light went dark. Celine exhaled through her nose, the calmness of a surgeon who had weathered countless storms of chaos. She would not let them erase her. If they wanted silence, she would create her own record. The man in the gray suit shifted again. His lips parted, but the words caught in his throat. He closed them with a snap, retreating into his cocoon of privilege. Celine turned back to the window. The horizon stretched endlessly, sun bleeding into clouds. Her reflection stared back, a woman soaked in orange juice, stained notes on her lap, but eyes sharp, unbroken. She imagined what her mother would have said in this moment. Grace is not weakness. Grace is a sword, sharpened quietly until the moment it must cut. Her phone continued recording, capturing the hum of engines, the muffled laughter from the galley, the weight of silence pressing against her. The humiliation was complete, but so was her resolve. She whispered inwardly, a mantra meant for herself alone. Hold steady. Document everything. Let the truth speak louder than their whispers. The plane cruised on, indifferent. But Celine knew something had shifted. The orange juice wasn't an accident. It was an opening act, the first ripple of a storm about to break, and she would be ready. The hum of the aircraft had become steady, a low vibration that filled the cabin like a background chorus. Passengers around Celine Ward were absorbed in their own worlds, scrolling through phones, flipping magazines, adjusting pillows. To them, nothing unusual was happening. But to Celine, the air felt weighted, charged with a kind of tension she had lived through too many times before. Her lap was still damp from the orange juice incident. The faint citrus smell clung to her blazer. She dabbed once more at the fabric with the useless napkins Marissa had left her, then folded them neatly on the tray table. She wanted no evidence of disorder on her part, no opening for accusation. From the galley, Marissa reappeared, her face a mask of professionalism. Though her eyes betrayed annoyance, she stopped at Celine's seat, her voice pitched just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "Is everything all right here? Dr. Ward." Celine blinked. The use of her name was deliberate, a reminder that Marissa had looked at her boarding pass, that she was being singled out. "My seat and belongings were soaked," Celine replied evenly. "I requested assistance with cleaning and a change of materials." I pressed the call button 3 times. No one came. Marissa tilted her head, lips curving in a smile that did not touch her eyes. We never heard a call signal from this row. Perhaps you imagined it. Gaslighting. Clean, sharp, and practiced. Celine's fingers curled against her lap. She fought the urge to let her voice rise. That was the trap. Anger would be framed as aggression. I pressed it 3 times, Celine repeated, her tone calm but firm. Passengers nearby can confirm the sound. The man in the gray suit shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing away, unwilling to be involved. Marissa shrugged, her smile widening. Sometimes nerves on a flight can make things feel more dramatic than they are. Perhaps you're just a bit unsettled today. The words sank like a stone in Celine's chest. She recognized the tactic, the effort to frame her as irrational, unstable. She had heard it before, in hospital boardrooms where she had been questioned more than her colleagues, in grant interviews where her answers had been dissected with unusual suspicion. Now, here at 35,000 feet, it was the same performance, just in a different uniform. Celine inhaled slowly, channeling the same control she summoned in the operating room. She reached for her notebook, flipping to a page still dry. With steady hands, she wrote in large letters, Incident 1014A M, multiple call buttons ignored. Marissa's eyes flicked to the writing, her expression tightening for a split second before smoothing again. "I'll see what I can do about a replacement for your notes," she said lightly, "though you must understand, our supplies are limited." She turned on her heel, heading back toward the galley. Celine sat still, her pen poised. The plane rocked gently as it cut through a patch of thin turbulence. The seatbelt light flickered on, and a few murmurs rose around the cabin. For Celine, it felt like a reflection of her own state, jolted but contained. Her mind spiraled inward. A voice whispered, "Maybe you should let this go. You are heading to San Francisco to give one of the most important lectures of your life. Why invite chaos into this moment?" Another voice rose, sharper and firmer. "If you stay silent, if you absorb this humiliation without a word, it will only continue. It will happen to someone else, someone without your platform, your resources." Her pulse quickened as the debate raged within her. Silence as strategy, or silence as surrender. The man in the gray suit finally leaned slightly toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes it's easier not to push. They'll only make it worse." Celine turned her head, her eyes steady on his, easier for whom she asked. The man blinked, then retreated into silence, his hands tightening around his champagne glass. Celine exhaled through her nose, adjusting the angle of her seat. She wanted to close her eyes, to drift away from the tension, but instead she found her hand moving to her phone again, brushing over the recorder icon. She checked it discreetly, still active, the red light glowing faintly against the dark screen. The voices, the denials, the tones all preserved. Minutes later, Dorian appeared, tray in hand, stopping at her row. He bent slightly, his whisper pitched low enough to pretend courtesy but sharp enough to sting. "Passengers don't usually document things on flights. Makes people nervous." Celine's chest tightened. She met his eyes directly, her voice calm, deliberate. Nervousness is not the same as accountability. For a brief second, Dorian's expression faltered. Then he straightened, turned on his heel, and moved down the aisle without another word. The exchange drew glances from nearby passengers. Some looked away quickly, pretending not to notice. One woman across the aisle studied Celine for a moment, her brows furrowed with sympathy. But no one spoke. Isolation thickened. Celine could feel it pressing against her skin, heavier than the citrus stains drying on her blazer. She was alone in a room full of people, a single figure forced to hold her composure against the weight of silence. Her stomach tightened, but her posture remained steady. She imagined herself back in the operating theater, where one slip of focus could mean life or death. Composure, there had been survival. Composure here would be resistance. She whispered inwardly, almost like a prayer. Hold steady, hold steady. The engines droned, masking the quickened pace of her heartbeat. She glanced again at her notes, now scarred by juice stains. The word resilience, though smeared, was still visible. She traced it lightly with her finger, letting it ground her. From the galley, Marissa's laughter floated out, bright and false. Celine closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her without breaking her silence. The recorder hummed on, unseen but alive. She was not imagining it. She was not unstable. She was being tested, and she was documenting every second. The storm outside had not yet broken, but inside the cabin, Celine knew it was already gathering. The minutes dragged on, heavy with silence and the faint drone of engines. Celine Ward sat perfectly upright, her lap still damp from the orange juice, her notebook ruined but still clutched in her hands like a shield. Her phone rested discreetly under the napkin, the recorder running, red circle glowing like a secret ally. Then came the announcement, a voice over the intercom, firm and authoritative, asked all passengers to remain seated. Celine's eyes narrowed. This was not standard. Something was about to unfold. The curtain at the front of the cabin pulled back, and Malcolm Rourke, the purser, stepped through. He was taller than most of the crew, his posture stiff, his jawline set like stone. His presence commanded attention, and even the man beside Celine sat up straighter. "Dr. Ward," Malcolm said, his voice level but edged with suspicion. "I've been told you've been pressing the call button repeatedly and causing disruption. Is that correct?" Celine tilted her chin upward, her voice calm. "I pressed the button 3 times because I was denied assistance after a spill. That's not disruption. That's a request for basic service." Malcolm's eyes narrowed. He folded his arms. "The crew reports you've been uncooperative, perhaps even confrontational. Gaslighting again." The script was predictable now, but it still landed like a blow. Celine kept her face composed. She refused to give him the reaction he seemed to want. "I've been calm throughout," she said, "and I have recordings to verify that." A ripple of surprise flickered across Malcolm's face, but he smoothed it quickly. He turned slightly, signaling to someone in the galley. The curtain shifted again, and Captain Alden Graves appeared. The captain's presence shifted the air instantly. His uniform was immaculate, his cap tucked under his arm. He carried the quiet authority of someone used to obedience. His eyes swept the cabin, pausing on Celine with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. "Doctor," Captain Graves began, his tone polite but weighted. "We've had reports that you're making this flight difficult for the crew. I'd like to hear your side." Celine's pulse quickened, but her voice stayed even. "Captain, the reports are inaccurate. I asked for assistance after a flight attendant spilled a drink on me and my belongings. My call buttons were ignored. When I persisted, I was accused of being disruptive." The captain's gaze flicked to Malcolm, who nodded subtly. Then he looked back at Celine. "I need to ensure the safety and order of this cabin. If there's a problem, it needs to be resolved quickly." At that moment, another figure appeared, moving with the quiet authority of law enforcement. Officer Rowan Hale, airline security, stepped into the aisle. His badge glinted under the cabin lights, his eyes sharp but not unkind. "Is this the passenger in question?" Rowan asked. "Yes," Malcolm said quickly. "She's been resisting instructions." Celine's jaw tightened. She could feel every pair of eyes in the cabin now, passengers pretending not to listen but leaning ever so slightly closer. Her dignity was on trial in the middle of the sky. She straightened her spine, her voice clear and steady. "Officer Hale, I am not resisting. I am being harassed. I have audio recordings that capture the spill, the dismissals, the refusal to respond to my call buttons. Would you like to hear them?" The officer hesitated. His eyes flicked between Celine and Malcolm, weighing the credibility of each. Then, in a tone that was measured but firm, he said, "Play them." Celine reached for her phone, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She tapped the screen, and the cabin filled with the muffled playback Marissa's clipped tone, the sound of the juice spilling, her dismissive words, the quiet accusation that perhaps Celine didn't belong in her seat. Murmurs rippled through the nearby rows. A woman gasped softly. The man in the gray suit beside her shifted uncomfortably, guilt shadowing his face for having stayed silent earlier. Malcolm's expression darkened, but he said nothing. Captain Graves cleared his throat, clearly unsettled by the evidence. "That's concerning." Celine looked him directly in the eye. "It's more than concerning. It's a pattern, and I will not be removed or silenced because of false reports." Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Its steadiness carried more weight than anger ever could. For a moment, silence reigned. Officer Hale studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. Then he turned toward Malcolm and Marissa, who stood stiffly near the galley curtain. "Is what we just heard accurate?" Hale asked. Marissa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes darted to Malcolm, who gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Hale's jaw tightened. He turned back to Celine. "Dr. Ward, for now I ask that you remain seated and calm. We'll be documenting this once we land." Celine inclined her head. "That's all I ask." The captain looked less certain now, his posture stiff but no longer commanding. He gave a curt nod and retreated toward the cockpit. Malcolm lingered a moment longer, his jaw clenched, before following. Marissa disappeared quickly into the galley, her face pale. Celine leaned back in her seat, exhaling slowly. The phone still glowed faintly in her hand, the recording continuing to capture every word. Around her, the passengers shifted in their seats, their silence heavy. She could feel their curiosity, their unease. Some looked at her with sympathy, others with the discomfort of people who had witnessed injustice but feared involvement. The man in the gray suit finally spoke, his voice low. "I should have said something earlier." Celine turned her head, her eyes steady on his. "It's never too late to do the right thing." He looked down at his lap, ashamed. Celine gazed out the window again, the clouds stretching endlessly into the horizon. The sky seemed calm, but inside the cabin, the storm had only begun. She had exposed the first crack in their facade. And now, With her evidence secured and authority witnesses present, she knew the tide was beginning to turn. But she also knew this battle was far from over. The cabin had settled into an uneasy quiet after Officer Rowan Hale's intervention. Celine Ward sat still, her blazer stiff with dried orange juice, her ruined notes heavy on her lap. The evidence she had played lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Some passengers avoided her gaze, burying themselves in screens or closing their eyes. Others glanced furtively, their silence complicity. Celine focused on the clouds outside, her reflection faint in the glass. She wanted to retreat into that quiet sky, but she knew the moment wasn't finished. She could feel it in the tightness of her chest, in the faint whispers drifting from the galley where Marissa Cade and Dorian Voss huddled with Malcolm Rourke. Then, a voice broke the silence. I heard it too. The words were clear, measured, and came from across the aisle. Celine turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting the face of an older woman. Silver hair framed her delicate features, and her posture was regal despite the cramped space of her seat. She wore a simple cream sweater, a string of pearls at her neck, and her expression carried the calm weight of conviction. My name is Eveline Marchand, the woman continued, projecting her voice just enough to carry across the first-class cabin, and I can confirm that Dr. Ward is telling the truth. I heard the call button. I heard the attendant dismiss her. And I heard that cruel remark after the spill. Gasps fluttered through the row behind them. Heads turned, eyes widening. For the first time, silence cracked, and truth began to seep through. Officer Hale shifted his stance, turning toward Eveline. Ma'am, you're certain, Eveline replied without hesitation. I may be 74 years old, but my hearing works just fine. What I witnessed was not a passenger causing trouble. It was a woman being disrespected for no reason at all. Celine felt a wave of gratitude so strong it threatened to loosen her composure. She met Eveline's eyes, and the older woman gave her a firm nod, as if to say, "You are not alone anymore." Malcolm stepped forward from the galley, his jaw tight. Passengers often misinterpret events. Emotions run high. We have to consider the safety of the crew. Eveline cut him off with a sharpness that silenced the row. Safety, I have lived long enough to know the difference between safety and scapegoating. What I saw was scapegoating. The murmur of passengers grew louder. A man 2 rows back leaned forward, his voice uncertain but audible. She's right. I heard it too. The attendant was out of line. Now it was no longer just Celine's word, it was a chorus, faint but growing. Marissa appeared from the galley, her smile brittle. Passengers often misunderstand crew procedures. Let's not escalate further. But her words fell flat. Eveline turned to the rows behind her, her voice steady. If you heard what I heard, you have a choice. You can keep your head down, or you can speak the truth. The silence held for a beat too long, heavy with hesitation. Then another voice rose. I saw the juice spill. It didn't look like an accident. This time it was a woman in the back of the cabin, clutching her tablet like a shield. Marissa's composure cracked, her eyes flashing. You have no idea how difficult this job is. We don't have to tolerate hostile passengers. Celine raised her hand gently, her voice calm but cutting through the noise. I have not been hostile. I have been calm, patient, and respectful. The hostility has been directed at me. Her words hung in the air, undeniable. Officer Hale nodded slowly. This is consistent with what I've observed since stepping into the cabin. The tide had shifted. Celine felt it, like a current pulling away from the lies that had been stacked against her. But with the shift came danger. Marissa's eyes narrowed, and she whispered something sharp to Dorian. He stiffened, then glanced nervously toward Malcolm. It was clear they had not expected the silence of the cabin to break. Celine's inner voice stirred. You are no longer isolated, but isolation breaking is only the beginning. The storm has further to climb. Her phone was still recording, capturing Eveline's testimony, the murmurs of passengers, the brittle protests of the crew. Evidence was no longer hers alone. It was multiplying in the voices of others. Eveline leaned slightly across the aisle, her eyes softening. Dr. Ward, you remind me of my daughter when she was your age. She, too, had to fight to be seen. Don't let them take your composure. That's your power. Celine felt her throat tighten. She nodded once, silently promising she would hold steady. The captain's voice came over the intercom again, calling Malcolm to the cockpit. His tone carried a note of unease now, stripped of the earlier certainty. Malcolm hesitated, then marched toward the curtain, disappearing with a final glance that landed somewhere between frustration and fear. The cabin settled again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy with complicity. It was buzzing, restless, like static before lightning. Celine leaned back into her seat. Her reflection in the window no longer looked quite so alone. She knew the battle was far from finished. But for the first time since the flight began, she felt the air tilt slightly in her favor. The truth had found its first voice outside of her own, and it had been heard. Eveline sat back in her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Her gaze remained forward, but her presence was a fortress beside Celine's quiet strength. Celine closed her eyes briefly, breathing in the fragile shift. For the first time on this flight, she allowed herself a thought that bordered on hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't fighting this storm entirely alone. The cabin was quieter now, but it was no longer the silence of indifference. Passengers shifted in their seats, aware of the tension simmering around them. Eveline Marchand's words had pierced the hush, and Celine Ward could feel eyes on her, some curious, some supportive, others simply unsettled. She sat still, phone in her hand beneath the napkin, the recorder still running. Her notes were ruined, her blazer stained, but her composure remained intact. And yet, inside, she knew the moment had come to reach for the one ally who could shift the ground beneath this flight entirely. She tapped her phone, swiping to her contacts. Her thumb hovered over the name she had avoided pressing until now. Calum Ward, husband, partner, CEO of Tech Fusion. A man whose calm power could move entire markets with a single decision. For a moment, she hesitated. A whisper inside her asked, "Should you involve him? Should you drag him into this storm when you are capable of weathering it yourself?" But another voice rose, firm and steady. "This isn't just about you. This is about accountability, about making sure they cannot do this again, to anyone." Celine pressed the call. The line rang only once before it connected. His voice, deep and steady, filled her ear. "Celine, are you safe?" Her throat tightened, but her reply was measured. "I'm safe, but I'm not being treated with dignity. It's happening again." There was a pause, the kind of pause that carried weight. She could almost hear him standing, pushing back from whatever boardroom or office he was in. "Tell me everything," Calum said. Celine spoke quietly, her words clipped and precise. She described the orange juice spill, the ignored call buttons, the gaslighting, the confrontation with Malcolm Rourke and Captain Graves, the testimony from Eveline. Her voice never wavered. When she finished, silence hummed on the line. Then Calum spoke, his tone like steel wrapped in velvet. "Stay calm. Stay exactly where you are. Do not move. Do not argue. I'll take it from here." "Calum," she began, but he cut her off gently. "No, Celine. You've endured enough. It's time they understand who they're dealing with." The line clicked off. Celine exhaled, her pulse quickening. She knew what that tone meant. Calum would not raise his voice, but he would raise the stakes. 10 minutes passed, though they felt like an eternity. The cabin remained heavy with tension. Marissa and Dorian hovered in the galley, whispering furiously. Malcolm had not returned from the cockpit. Eveline sat serenely in her seat, her hands folded, her gaze fixed forward. Then Celine's phone vibrated with a message. She slid her thumb across the screen and read, "Calum Ward, I've spoken to Lucian Stroud. This flight is now under review. Record everything. They will try harder now. Do not flinch." Her chest tightened. Lucian Stroud, the CEO of the airline itself. If Calum had already made that call, then the situation had escalated beyond the cabin. The people who thought they were in control of her dignity were about to learn otherwise. Moments later, the purser, Malcolm, reappeared. His face was stiff, his movement sharp. He avoided Celine's eyes as he approached Eveline's row, addressing her with forced politeness. "Madam, we appreciate your input, but I must remind you that crew reports take precedence during flight. Please refrain from further interruptions." Eveline tilted her head, unimpressed. "I wasn't interrupting. I was correcting a lie." The murmur of passengers swelled again. Malcolm's jaw flexed. He turned on his heel and retreated, the curtain swishing behind him. Celine's phone vibrated once more. Another message from Calum. "They'll know by landing, but I want it documented in real time. Can you stream?" Her fingers hesitated. Streaming would expose her, but it would also protect her. She thought of the countless incidents swept under rugs because there had been no proof beyond a single voice. She tapped the camera icon, her hand steady. The red light blinked. A quiet live broadcast began, the lens angled toward her tray table and notebook. Her voice, soft but clear, narrated, "This is Dr. Celine Ward. I'm on Flight 482 en route to San Francisco. I have experienced harassment and gaslighting from crew members after an intentional spill. This is being recorded for my safety." The murmurs in the cabin grew sharper. Some passengers glanced around nervously. Others leaned in, curious. Eveline gave a subtle nod of approval. Marissa emerged from the galley, her smile brittle. "Dr. Ward, passengers are not permitted to record or stream during flight." Celine's eyes lifted to hers, calm but unwavering. "Show me the regulation that says I cannot record for my own safety." Marissa faltered, her smile flickering. Officer Rowan Hale stepped forward from his post near the cockpit. His voice was steady. "There's no regulation against recording as long as it doesn't interfere with safety equipment. She has every right." The balance in the cabin shifted again. Celine felt it. The crew's control was slipping, and they knew it. Her phone vibrated with another message. Calum good. They're watching. Don't stop." Celine inhaled deeply, her chest filling with air that no longer felt suffocating. She was not just enduring now. She was fighting with composure, with evidence, with allies both near and far. Passengers whispered louder. A man from 3 rows back leaned forward, his voice carrying, "If she gets removed, I'll walk off too." The words spread like sparks. Others murmured their agreement. Celine kept her eyes forward, her voice low but clear as she spoke into the camera again. "I am calm. I am seated. The truth will not be buried here." The storm was no longer quiet. It was rising, and Selina knew that with Calum now in the fight, it was about to break wide open. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but beneath it ran a sharper current, voices murmuring, whispers building into something restless. Celine Ward kept her phone angled discreetly, her live stream capturing the tension that had turned first class into a stage. Her calm narration measured, steady contrasted with the nervous shifting of the crew. Marissa Cade stood near the galley, her posture rigid, a smile frozen on her lips. Dorian Voss hovered at her side, whispering furiously. Malcolm Rourke paced once before ducking behind the curtain toward the cockpit. Their control, once absolute, now faltered under the weight of eyes and evidence. A passenger 3 rows back broke the hush. "She's telling the truth. I saw it. If anyone tries to remove her, I'll protest." The words rang clear. Heads turned. Someone else added, "Same here." Marissa's smile cracked. She raised her hands, her voice pitched louder than before. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need calm. The safety of this cabin depends on your cooperation with the crew." But her words landed hollow. Celine sensed it. The air was shifting. What had begun as isolation was now swelling into solidarity. Eveline Marchand, her silver hair glinting under the soft lights, straightened in her seat. "Safety is not the issue," she said firmly. "Respect is. We've all seen what's happening here. Don't insult our intelligence." The man in the gray suit beside Celine shifted again, shame flickering across his features. At last, he cleared his throat and spoke, his voice low but audible. "I stayed quiet earlier. That was a mistake. I saw her press the call button. I saw them ignore her. I saw the spill. It wasn't an accident." Marissa's eyes flashed, but she said nothing. Celine turned her head slightly, offering the man a nod. "Thank you." Her phone buzzed against her palm. Another message from Calum lit the screen. "The board is watching. Every second matters. Stay calm." Her chest tightened, but not from fear, from resolve. Officer Rowan Hale stepped forward again, his stance calm but authoritative. "Crew, you need to understand, passengers are corroborating her account. This isn't just one voice. I suggest we manage this carefully." Malcolm returned from the cockpit, his face flushed, his voice sharp. "Captain Graves insists order be restored immediately. If passengers are siding against crew, we could have a safety violation on our hands." Eveline's voice cut through again, sharper than before. "Order is not obedience to injustice. Order is fairness, and right now, fairness is being ignored." The cabin rippled with murmurs of agreement. Celine lifted her phone slightly, her voice calm but carrying. "I am calm. I am seated. I am not refusing safety instructions. What is happening here is harassment, documented and witnessed." Her words landed like a verdict. Dorian stepped forward, his tone sharp. You're making a spectacle of this flight. Selene met his eyes. No, I'm making a record. The spectacle is yours. The row behind her clapped softly, a few passengers joining with quiet snaps of approval. The sound was small, but undeniable. Marissa's composure cracked further. Enough, she snapped. Turn off the phone or we will confiscate it. Officer Hale shook his head. You won't. That would violate passenger rights. If you lay a hand on her phone, I'll intervene. The silence that followed was different this time. It was no longer tense with fear, but heavy with consequence. Malcolm's voice dropped low, almost a growl. Do you realize what you're doing? You're undermining crew authority mid-flight. Do you want chaos? Celine's tone stayed calm, unflinching. No, Mr. Rourke, I want accountability. There's a difference. Her words carried weight. Passengers nodded, some leaned forward, whispering to one another. The tide was no longer subtle. It was visible, undeniable. The intercom chimed again. Captain Graves's voice filled the cabin, but this time it was not commanding. It was cautious. Ladies and gentlemen, we ask for your patience. We are addressing a situation with the assistance of our onboard security. Please remain calm and seated. The words lacked conviction. Even the captain knew the ground had shifted. Selene adjusted her posture, her back straight, her voice low as she spoke again into her live stream. This is what happens when silence breaks. One voice becomes two, then three, then many. The truth does not disappear, it spreads. Marissa took a step forward, but Eveline rose partway from her seat. Her hand braced against the armrest. Her voice carried with surprising strength. If you lay one more hand, spill one more drink, or speak one more lie to this woman, you will answer not only to her, but to every one of us here. A murmur of agreement swelled, louder than before. Celine's phone buzzed again. Calum's message appeared. Perfect. Keep steady. They're losing grip. For the first time since the flight began, Selene allowed herself the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of quiet strength. She turned her gaze back to the window, the clouds rolling endlessly below. The storm in the cabin was nearing its peak, but she was no longer alone in it. What began as humiliation had become resistance, and resistance was spreading seat by seat. Her inner voice whispered once more, "Hold steady. This is bigger than you now. Let it rise." And rise it did. The tension in the cabin felt like a taut wire, stretched too far, ready to snap. Selene Ward sat quietly in her seat, phone balanced on her lap, the live stream running. Her voice, calm and precise, had narrated the unfolding events for nearly half an hour. Each word was a counterweight against the accusations leveled at her. But the battle was no longer just within the walls of the aircraft. Miles away, in an office lined with glass and steel, Calum Ward was moving the pieces of an entirely different board. Calum's voice carried a chill as he spoke into his phone. "Lucian, your crew has humiliated my wife. The evidence is already live. Thousands are watching. By the time this flight lands, millions will." On the other end, Lucian Stroud, CEO of the airline, tried for composure. "Calum, let's not dramatize. I'm sure this is a misunderstanding. We'll review it internally." Calum's laugh was quiet, humorless. A misunderstanding. "You're trending already." "Justice for Selene. Do you think this is containable?" Lucian hesitated. His voice dropped, measured but defensive. "You know the implications of interfering mid-flight. Procedures must be respected. Procedures, Calum said sharply, are not shields for abuse. You've had warnings before, complaints buried, staff rotated, policies rewritten to protect the guilty. I have the files. I've kept them. Did you think I wouldn't? Lucian's silence stretched across the line. Calum leaned back in his chair, his hand tightening around the armrest. By the time this flight touches ground, you will make a choice. You can either protect a crew who crossed a line, or you can protect your airline. You know which choice your shareholders expect. Back on the plane. Celine felt the faint buzz of another message. She glanced at her phone. Calum, he's cornered. Keep recording. Their hierarchy is collapsing. Celine exhaled softly. The knowledge steadied her, but it also raised the stakes. She shifted her focus to the cabin, where Marissa Cade still lingered like a shadow near the galley, her smile brittle, her confidence unraveling. Malcolm Rourke returned from the cockpit, his expression sour. He leaned close to Marissa and Dorian, whispering urgently. Though Celine couldn't hear the words, the tension in their faces said enough. Officer Rowan Hale stepped closer to Celine's row, his presence a subtle barrier. His voice was low, meant only for her. I don't know what's happening outside this plane, but I can tell something has shifted. They're nervous. Celine gave a small nod. They should be. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. Calum's name lit the screen. She answered, keeping her voice soft. I'm here. His tone was steady, deliberate. The board has been notified. Stroud is panicking. He'll try to stall, maybe even push blame back onto you. Don't let them bait you. Just stay calm. Every second is leverage. Celine closed her eyes briefly, letting his words ground her. I'm holding steady. I know you are, Calum said. That's why they're losing. She ended the call, tucking the phone discreetly under the napkin again. Then, as if on cue, the intercom chimed. Captain Alden Graves's voice filled the cabin, formal but tinged with unease. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. We are aware of the concerns raised and will be addressing them fully upon landing. Until then, please remain seated. The message was vague, but its very vagueness betrayed cracks in authority. Passengers exchanged glances. Eveline Marchand gave a small, knowing smile. Marissa, however, was not ready to concede. She stepped forward, her voice louder, more brittle. This is exactly why passengers shouldn't record. It distorts events, spreads panic. We are professionals. We deserve trust. A voice rose from the back, firm and unsparing. Trust is earned. You spilled juice on her and mocked her. We all saw it. The ripple of agreement was louder this time, passengers murmuring openly. A few even clapped quietly. Marissa's face flushed. She turned sharply toward Malcolm, but Malcolm's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. Dorian muttered something about regulations, but his voice was drowned out by another passenger speaking up. She's handled herself better than any of you. Calm, respectful. If anyone's disruptive, it's not her. The tide had turned completely now. What began as Celine alone against the crew had grown into a chorus. Celine remained composed, but inside, a quiet flame burned. This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who has ever sat silently in this kind of seat, swallowing humiliation to avoid escalation. Officer Hale raised his hand slightly, commanding attention. All right. This is no longer a matter of one person's word. We have multiple passengers corroborating. Until we land, Doctor, Ward stays in her seat. There will be no removal." A wave of relief washed through Celine, though she didn't let it show. Instead, she inclined her head. "Thank you." Eveline leaned over, her voice soft but fierce. "You've already won more than you know." Selena met her eyes, gratitude unspoken but clear. In the galley, Marissa retreated, her composure cracked entirely now. Dorian followed, muttering under his breath. Malcolm remained in the aisle a moment longer, his gaze sweeping the cabin. He saw the passengers watching, saw the officer standing guard, saw Celine's quiet strength. For the first time, he looked uncertain. Celine's phone buzzed once more. Another message from Calum. "Lucian has agreed to a board meeting tonight. Every executive will hear what happened. This will not end in silence." Her chest lifted with a steady breath. The storm had not passed, but its direction had changed. What began as an attempt to strip her of dignity had become something larger, a reckoning, both in the sky and on the ground. Celine leaned back, her gaze on the endless horizon outside the window. The engines hummed on, carrying them forward. But she knew the true destination was no longer just San Francisco. It was justice. The captain's announcement that the plane had begun its descent should have brought relief. But the cabin carried a different weight. Every creak of the overhead bins, every hiss of the pressurization system felt charged. For Celine Ward, each minute closer to landing was another step toward the confrontation she knew was waiting. She sat with her back straight, her blazer stiff with dried juice, her phone balanced on her thigh beneath a folded napkin. The live stream had run steadily, capturing not just her words but those of passengers who had chosen to speak. Her quiet narration, interspersed with testimony from Eveline Marchand and others, was no longer just a record. It had become evidence that the crew could not erase. Marissa Cade walked the aisle one last time before landing. Her smile was gone now, replaced with a mask of strained professionalism. She collected glasses with stiff hands, her shoulders tight, her eyes darting toward Celine's row. When she reached Celine, her fingers trembled as she extended the tray. "Glassware, please," she said softly, almost too softly. Celine placed her empty cup neatly on the tray. Their eyes met, and in Marissa's gaze, Celine saw a flicker fear, perhaps, or the dawning recognition of consequences. But Celine did not gloat. She only nodded once, calm and dignified. Dorian Voss passed by a moment later, avoiding her gaze entirely. His movements were jerky, betraying nerves he could not hide. Malcolm Rourke remained near the galley, conferring with Captain Alden Graves through the cracked curtain, his voice hushed but urgent. Officer Rowan Hale stayed planted near Celine's row, arms folded, his presence both shield and signal. His stance alone kept the tension from boiling over again. The intercom chimed. Captain Graves's voice came over, steady but subdued. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be landing shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your belongings secured." The usual calm authority was missing. His tone carried hesitation, as if he knew his voice no longer commanded the same trust it once had. Celine checked her phone one more time. A new message from Calum appeared. "Stroud is preparing to meet us at the gate. He's rattled. Don't say more than you need to. Just hold steady. I'll be there." Her chest tightened, a mix of relief and anticipation. She whispered inwardly, "Hold steady." The wheels touched down with a jolt, the engines roaring into reverse thrust. The cabin lurched, then steadied as the plane slowed along the runway. A collective exhale rose from passengers, the normal relief of landing mingling with the awareness that the real drama had only paused, not ended. As the plane taxied, Marissa tried once more to assert herself. She leaned into Celine's row, her voice pitched low. "For what it's worth, I never meant for things to go this far." Celine regarded her, calm and unsparing. The path to here was built one choice at a time. Every word, every dismissal, every look. That was you. Marissa flinched, her lips parting as if to defend herself. But no words came. She straightened and retreated quickly down the aisle. The plane rolled to a stop at the gate. The familiar chime of the seatbelt sign turning off filled the air, but no one moved. All eyes seemed to shift toward Celine. She remained still, her phone still recording, her composure unbroken. Officer Hale leaned slightly closer. "When we disembark, they may try to separate you from the crowd. Do not go anywhere alone. I'll walk with you." Celine inclined her head. "Thank you." The doors opened with a hiss, and the jet bridge attached with a shudder. Beyond that door lay the waiting ground the airline's attempt to manage the narrative. The press Calum had almost certainly ensured would be present, and Lucian Stroud himself. Malcolm emerged first, speaking rapidly to ground staff waiting outside. His gestures were sharp, his voice clipped. Marissa and Dorian trailed behind him, their faces pale, their uniforms rumpled from the weight of the ordeal. Passengers began to rise, pulling bags from overhead bins, but many lingered, their eyes still on Celine. Eveline Marchand touched her arm lightly. "You don't walk out of this plane alone." Celine's throat tightened with gratitude. "I won't." The aisle filled with movement, but when Celine finally rose, something remarkable happened. Passengers around her stepped aside, making space. It was subtle, but deliberate. They were no longer just observers. They were allies marking her dignity. She walked calmly down the aisle. Officer Hale just behind her, Eveline close at her side. The murmur of the crowd grew louder near the door. Then she stepped onto the jet bridge, the bright fluorescent light striking her eyes after the dim cabin. Waiting there was Lucian Stroud. His suit was immaculate, his posture tall, but his face betrayed strain. Cameras clicked somewhere beyond the glass wall of the terminal. A small group of executives flanked him, their expressions tense, and beside them stood Calum Ward, his presence magnetic, his gaze fixed on Celine with quiet intensity. The air between the two men crackled with unspoken confrontation. Lucian extended a hand, his smile brittle. "Dr. Ward, we regret any inconvenience. Let's move to a private space to discuss this." Calum's voice cut across, low and resonant. "No, we don't hide this in private rooms anymore. Everyone here saw it. Everyone will know." Lucian's smile faltered. Celine felt the eyes of passengers behind her, the weight of their solidarity. She glanced once at Eveline, who gave a firm nod. Then she looked at Calum. His jaw was set, but his eyes softened when they met hers. The moment had arrived. The flight was over, but the showdown had only just begun. The jet bridge air was colder than the cabin had been, its sterile hum mixing with the distant chatter of airport staff. Celine Ward stepped forward, her heels striking softly against the industrial flooring. Behind her, passengers flowed out in a quiet stream, but the silence was not indifference. It was watchfulness. Lucian Stroud stood waiting, polished in a navy suit, his silver hair carefully combed, His smile stretched too thin. To his right, two executives shifted uneasily. To his left, Malcolm Rourke hovered, his face tight with nerves. Marissa Cade and Dorian Voss stood further back, their uniforms wrinkled, their eyes downcast. And at the center of it all was Calum Ward, calm and unshakable, his presence like a storm contained within still waters. "Dr. Ward," Lucian said, extending a hand. "On behalf of Skyline Airways, I want to apologize for any discomfort you may have experienced." The words were smooth, practiced, but Celine could hear the cracks beneath them. She didn't take his hand. Instead, she looked at him with quiet steadiness. Discomfort is what you feel in a cramped seat. What I experienced was humiliation, and it was deliberate. Lucian's hand faltered, then dropped. His jaw tightened. Calum stepped closer, his voice low but carrying. "We are not here for polished apologies. We are here for accountability." A murmur rippled through the passengers exiting behind them. Some slowed, watching. Eveline Marchand remained nearby, her presence regal, her expression sharp. Lucian glanced around, aware of the eyes, the phones lifted discreetly to record. "Calum, perhaps we should move this to a conference room. We don't want a spectacle." Calum's lips curved into the faintest smile, devoid of warmth. "A spectacle is what your crew created at 30,000 feet. Transparency is the least you owe now." Lucian swallowed. His executives shifted again, their discomfort growing. Celine's phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, her live stream still running. The numbers of viewers had spiked, tens of thousands watching in real time. She lifted the phone slightly, its camera angled to capture the scene. "This is not just my story anymore," she said softly, her voice steady. "This belongs to everyone who has ever been dismissed, belittled, or silenced in the air." Lucian's mask slipped for a moment, his eyes flicking to the phone. He knew this could not be buried. Calum's voice sharpened. "Lucian, your airline holds contracts with Tech Fusion worth billions. Those contracts are now in jeopardy. Unless, right here, right now, you commit to immediate, sweeping reform, training, reporting systems, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and accountability not just for frontline staff, but for leadership that protects them." The words landed like hammer strikes. Lucian's eyes flicked to his executives. One of them, a woman with tightly bound hair, leaned in and whispered something urgently. Lucian's jaw clenched. He looked back at Calum, his voice strained. "You're asking me to rewrite our entire operating culture on the spot." "I'm telling you," Calum replied, his tone like iron. "You don't have a choice." Behind Celine, Eveline stepped forward, her voice carrying with surprising strength. "He's right. I saw it with my own eyes, and so did half this cabin. If you bury this, it will only rise louder." Other passengers murmured agreement. A young man pulled out his phone, holding it high. "I was there. I'll testify if I have to." The ripple grew dozens of witnesses, quiet but resolute. Lucian's composure cracked. Sweat glistened at his temple. He turned sharply to Malcolm, who stood frozen. "What happened up there?" Malcolm stammered. "There were conflicts, misunderstandings. Misunderstandings don't trend on social media in under an hour," Calum said coldly. Marissa stepped forward suddenly, her voice brittle. "It wasn't just me. Passengers exaggerate." "Enough," Lucian snapped, silencing her. The crew flinched, realizing his loyalty had evaporated. Celine remained calm, her voice cutting through the noise. This isn't about one flight attendant. This is about a culture that allowed her behavior to thrive, that protected her dismissals, that enabled her cruelty. Lucian's shoulders sagged. He looked at Calum, then at Celine, then at the small crowd forming just beyond the jet bridge doors, passengers, staff, reporters drawn by the murmurs of commotion. Finally, he exhaled. Very well. We will issue an immediate suspension of the crew involved. An internal review will begin tonight, and we will consider broader reforms. Calum's eyes narrowed. Not enough. Lucian bristled. What more do you expect in this moment? Calum stepped closer, his voice low, lethal in its precision. Public acknowledgement, a commitment to systemic change, and a seat at the table for my wife, whose dignity you tried to strip at 30,000 feet. She will not be erased from this story. The weight of his words hung heavy. Lucian looked at Celine, then back at Salem. For a moment, his pride warred with pragmatism. Then, slowly, he nodded. Celine felt the shift. It wasn't triumph. It was the beginning of accountability. Eveline leaned closer to her, whispering, "You've done it. They can't bury this now." Celine's eyes remained steady on Lucian. This isn't about victory. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. The doors to the terminal opened wider. Reporters pressed forward, cameras flashing. The crowd surged. Lucian paled. Calum extended an arm, subtly, guiding Selena forward, his presence both shield and anchor. Together, they stepped into the glare of the lights, the roar of voices rising around them. The reckoning had only just begun. The lights of the terminal bathed everything in a harsh glow. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, passengers spilled into the corridor, their voices a low thunder of outrage and support. Celine Ward stood in the middle of it all, calm, upright, her phone still streaming. She felt like the eye of a storm chaos spinning around her, but her center unshaken. Beside her, Calum Ward's presence radiated quiet authority. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, not to guide, but to anchor, across from them. Lucian Stroud looked pale, beads of sweat visible under the relentless cameras. "Dr. Ward," a reporter called out, voice urgent. "What do you want from the airline after this?" Selene lifted her gaze, her voice steady. "I want what every passenger deserves: dignity, accountability, and safety. This isn't about revenge, it's about change." The crowd hushed, her words sinking into the charged air. Eveline Marchand stepped forward, her silver hair catching the lights, her voice carrying with surprising strength. "I saw what happened. I will testify, and I will not allow them to silence her truth." Applause erupted from some of the passengers clustered nearby. Others raised their phones higher, capturing the moment. Lucian lifted his hands, his voice faltering but audible. We hear you. Skyline Airways will begin immediate disciplinary action against the crew members involved. We will launch an independent review. And we will," he faltered, his eyes darting to Calum, who gave the slightest nod. "We will commit to systemic reforms overseen by external advisors." The words were thin, but they were binding in the glare of cameras. Calum's voice followed, calm but unyielding. "Those advisors will include Dr. Ward. She will not just be a passenger in this story, she will be part of the solution, and Skyline will put real resources behind it: training, reporting systems, measurable accountability, not in 6 months, not next year, Now? Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. His executives exchanged nervous glances, but none dared speak. Marissa Cade tried once more to interject, her voice trembling. "This is unfair. I was only doing my job." The words were drowned out by boos and sharp retorts from nearby passengers. One man shouted, "We saw you humiliate her." Another added, "You don't deserve that uniform." Marissa's face crumpled. She turned to Lucian for support, but found none. His eyes were hard, his loyalty gone. Dorian Voss and Malcolm Rourke stood equally abandoned, their shoulders slumped. The facade of authority they had worn on the plane had evaporated in the terminal light. Celine raised a hand, and the noise quieted. Her voice, soft but commanding, filled the space. This isn't about destroying individuals. It's about dismantling a culture that allows cruelty to hide behind procedure. What happened to me today has happened to others. Too many times, without witnesses, without proof. Today, we had both. Tomorrow, we must have change. The terminal fell into silence. Even the reporters lowered their microphones slightly, moved by the weight of her words. Calum stepped closer to Lucian. His voice so low only a few nearby caught it, but the cameras still captured his intensity. "You have one chance to get this right. If you fail, I'll make sure Skyline doesn't see another quarter as a functioning airline." Lucian swallowed hard, nodding once. His empire trembled in that moment, and he knew it. Eveline placed a hand gently on Celine's arm. "You've done more than hold your ground. You've shifted it." Celine gave the older woman a grateful smile. "We shifted it. Together." Hours later, after statements were taken and passengers dispersed, Celine and Calum walked out of the terminal side by side. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and sea breeze. Flashbulbs had dimmed, the roar of voices replaced with the distant hum of traffic. Celine finally let out a long breath. Her shoulders sagged slightly, the weight of the ordeal pressing down now that it was over. Calum looked at her, his eyes softening. "You were extraordinary." She shook her head gently. "I just told the truth, and I didn't back down. That," he said, his hand finding hers, "is extraordinary." They reached the car, waiting at the curb. As the driver opened the door, Celine paused, glancing back once at the glowing terminal. For a moment, she replayed the images, the spilled juice, the dismissals. Eveline's brave voice rising, passengers breaking their silence. Lucian cornered by truth. Her inner voice whispered, "It's not over, but it's begun." Weeks later, the ripple effects spread. Skyline Airways announced sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, a transparent reporting system with real-time escalation, a passenger advocacy office, and a multi-million-dollar fund to support diversity in aviation. For the first time, measurable accountability entered the airline structure. Marissa, Dorian, and Malcolm were terminated. Their names circulated across the industry. Captain Graves was placed on review and reassigned to ground duty. Officer Hale, whose integrity had stood firm, was promoted to lead a new passenger rights division. Eveline Marchand was invited to serve on Skyline's advisory board, her dignity honored. And, at the center of it all, Celine Ward's name became synonymous with dignity under pressure. Her live stream had gone viral, reaching millions, sparking debates, igniting change. She had not asked for the spotlight, but she had refused to shrink beneath it. At home, late at night, Celine would sometimes sit by the window with Calum, their hands intertwined, the city lights flickering below. She would think of the quiet moments on the plane when she had doubted herself, when she had wondered if speaking up would only make things worse. And she would remember Eveline's words, "Don't let them take your composure. That's your power." In the end, it wasn't power or wealth that had shifted the tide. It was composure. It was truth. It was the refusal to be erased. The world had watched, and the world had changed one flight, one voice, one stand at a time. What began with a single cruel act in the sky ended with a storm of truth that no airline could bury. Dr. Celine Ward's quiet strength, Calum Ward's unwavering resolve, and the courage of passengers who spoke up together forced an industry to change. But this story is not just about one flight, it's about every voice ever silenced, every passenger ever humiliated, every person ever told they didn't belong. Tonight, we saw how dignity can't be spilled like juice, mocked away, or erased behind procedure. We are left with a choice to look away, or to stand taller, to accept injustice, or to demand accountability. Celine chose the latter, and because of that, millions now see clearer. Carry this story with you. Remember the power of composure, of truth, of solidarity. Let it remind you that justice begins when one person refuses to shrink in the face of cruelty. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories that matter, stories that challenge, inspire, and ignite change. Because the sky belongs to all of us, and dignity must always fly first.